Hello, my name is Claire Kearney-Volpe, and I'm presenting on behalf of my co-authors and colleagues, Chancey Fleet, Keita Oshiro, Veronica Alfaro Arias, and my advisor and co-author, Dr. Amy Hurst. Our work is entitled Making the Elusive More Tangible, and I'll be presenting on our remote tools and techniques for teaching web development to screen reader users. First, some background. So we know that there is a growing demand for web skills as well as online educational materials and tools. And COVID-19 in the last year and a bit has accelerated a shift to remote learning and created new pressure on workers to upskill and circumvent financial disruptions caused by loss of work. At the same time, little is known about the screen reader accessibility of learning web development, and in particular, remote learning of web development. So to address this gap, we devised two research questions. The first is, how can we design and evaluate remote accessible support tools to engage and motivate blind students in web development? The second is, what remote tools and techniques support learning web development in blind students? So just some related work. There has been a ton of research on inclusive coding curricula, blind coder and blind programming curricula that have demonstrated the benefit of things like accessible IDEs, evidence-based programming languages, multisensory curriculum, using tactile diagrams. But all of these prior efforts have focused on computer science generally. And that's where we're kind of stepping in to fill in and learn more, contribute to the literature related to web development specific practices. So jumping into our design and methods. So we had two major activities as part of this research. First was the design of tactile diagrams that were supposed to support learning CSS and visual design concepts. And that was done through remote collaborative design sessions to create the tactile diagrams. And then we also had a web development workshop, excuse me, which was a 9-week remote workshop. And we incorporated the diagrams as part of that. We had a accessible class website. We used Google Groups to encourage the students to converse outside of class time, share resources and ask questions. And we used Zoom for the whole thing. In total, we had 14 blind students enroll and complete the class, and we had 14 volunteer TAs, so there was one-on-one support for the students. The data that we collected a bunch, pre and post workshop surveys that asked questions related to confidence in web development concepts, as well as interest in pursuing work and further education in web development. We also have observational field notes, in-class polls that we asked using Zoom, and then unit quizzes. And then finally, at the end of the workshop, we invited students to participate in exit interviews, and 10 of them did. Okay, so for the first activity, which was the remote tactile diagram design, which was very interesting to figure out in this remote environment. And it was a collaborative effort by myself and my co-author, Chancey Fleet, who is a blind assistive tech educator, and I am a sighted designer. And so together we had these sessions where we would collaborate. I would make something in Illustrator, export it, email it to her. She would emboss it at her at-home using her at-home embosser. And then, once she had it embossed, she would give me great, like super descriptive feedback about all the different design elements, and we would iterate based on that feedback. So we had 4 of these 1-hour sessions, and they yielded 8 diagrams that were supportive of these like CSS and design concepts, and we mailed them to each of the students' home addresses. So I have on the screen visual representations of each one of those 8 tactile diagrams, and I'll just cover them in brief and describe them in brief. So starting from top left to right and going down, we have a font type diagram, and it's 2 letter Fs side by side. One is in serif font and has little extra dangly bits, and the other is sans serif font, so the learner can sort of feel the distinction, the differences between the font types. And then the second diagram is side by side, sans serif font and serif fonts repeated the word typography in different font families. So it's meant to illustrate the variety of different font families. And so it's the word typography in those fonts and labeled the font family in Braille. And then the third diagram we have is meant to represent relative font sizes, and particularly to emphasize the default sizing of some really common HTML elements like H1 through 6, paragraph, etc. Or that's it. And it's done so by having the word hello repeated, in increasing size going from top to bottom, and with the Braille sort of labels of what that size is and what element is that size approximately by default. The fourth is a box model diagram, so meant to convey the sort of spatial relationships between elements, their content, border, padding, and margin, and that's represented by these concentric rectangles with different color backgrounds and Braille labels. And then we have the Google homepage without any styling. By default, all the elements represented tactilely, different shapes and Braille labels. All the elements sort of butt up against the left side of the screen by default. And then another tactile that represents how the actual homepage looks like, with the elements sort of distributed more horizontally across the screen when alignment and sort of spacing is applied with CSS. And then we have a couple of different, number 7 and number 8 are color wheel diagrams. The first is the full color wheel with full color labels and a legend down at the bottom right. And the legend is explaining that we're using different shapes to communicate primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. So we've got primary colors in our squares, and secondary colors are circles, and tertiary are triangles, excuse me. And then finally, we have a very similar color wheel diagram just to the right of that, but it has abbreviated color name labels in Braille and connecting lines to the different colors to sort of demonstrate complementary color relationships. Okay. And then next, I just wanted to kind of go in depth on one of these a little bit more to sort of demonstrate how we were tracking salient design features that we wanted to evaluate and understand how they supported learning. So I have an image of the color wheel in its dot format. So take it from its Illustrator output and then converted to a dot format just before embossing. It's black and white and kind of in these pixelated dots. And I'm highlighting that we've used orienting markers in the top right of the diagram, and then what each of the shapes mean. Okay, so after the tactile diagram design portion of this work, we had our web development workshop. And again, that was 9 weeks long, and we covered units on an intro to the web, HTML, CSS and design, and then a brief introduction to JavaScript. And so over the 9 weeks, each session was 2.5 hours long. We had an 1.5 hour lecture / discussion, and then an hour dedicated so that the students and TAs could have one-on-one practice time. We also had a guest lecture towards the end of the 9 weeks by a blind web developer who told us all about his experiences in the job market. And it was fantastic. He was great. So just a little bit on the class website. Again, it included all of the units, Intro to Web, HTML, CSS, Design, and JavaScript, as well as a super robust resource section. Each of the units contained lesson content, so the students could like follow along during the lectures, code snippets, activities, and links to external sites. And then the resource section had listing of different screen reader workflow documentation. So things like how to use the browser-based developer tools, how to use Git, etc. So that was all documented that they could sort of follow along and learn themselves, as well as additional links to additional learning. And the whole website was built to meet WCAG 2.1 requirements. Okay, so jumping to the findings. So student outcomes. All students created and published websites, so that was a success. Student feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and they felt that the techniques and tools we used supported their learning. Confidence scores in the sort of between pre and post increased significantly, and interest stayed high. So they went in very interested and remained interested in learning more about web development and pursuing web development careers. One of the things that we found is sort of a negative is that people felt really rushed, especially around CSS and JavaScript. They wanted more time and more practice on those subjects. So on that, I've got some participant quotes just to sort of highlight the key themes. Participant 4 in an exit interview said, I would make it longer, like 10 to 12 sessions. Regarding next steps, a lot of participants had plans to and real momentum at the end of the class, and they described wanting to take more advanced trainings, to keep developing their personal website. And one participant even said that he wanted to take our curriculum, remix it, and teach it himself, which is awesome. So I have a quote here from participant number 5 in the exit interview saying, "It has given me the tools to go forward. It's piqued my interest to continue and develop a presence, a web presence, and practice what I learned." So this is a kind of tagline in the title of the paper. But again, the feedback that we got was overwhelmingly positive. And I have a quote from participant 2 here said, "The elusive thing was more tangible. To feel what it would look like, it was a revelation." And that was in reference to the tactile diagrams and conveying and describing some of the spatial relationships between elements on a web page. Okay, so we got lots of great feedback about the tactile diagrams and directions to carry them forward. So exit interview participants felt that they, made really difficult to grasp visual concepts more concrete. And they found that the color wheel, font type, and Google homepage tactiles to be the most helpful. And we got some suggestions, some feedback. The font family example was actually really difficult to discern that word typography that was repeated over and over again. Students wanted that to be made much larger, to be tactily, to be able to discriminate between them. We also got some suggestions to make, in addition to the Google homepage, other common websites to demonstrate spatial relationships, different types of layouts, spacing, and positioning of elements. And then we also got a request to create a box model diagram to demonstrate how padding, borders, and margin of like multiple elements interact with each other. So a not super anticipated outcome of this research is not part of our initial aims or research questions was the positive outcomes for TAs, for the teaching assistants. So they benefited in that they learned and gained confidence around web accessibility concepts like WCAG, ADA. They increased significantly between pre and post. Also, their median interest scores related to pursuing accessibility-related work increased, and TAs described how they would apply their learnings to their project work going forward. So that was great. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up and go through the conclusions. So we feel that accessible curricula and support tools can certainly stimulate confidence and increase workforce skills among blind web development students. And this workshop benefited both students and TA volunteers. More work is certainly needed to ensure that web development, education, and practice are more accessible. And we want to do that to advance the democratization of the web as well as the accessibility of the web. There's just tons of different directions that we can go to carry this work forward. We want to develop more advanced trainings to keep up with like the momentum and the excitement that the students had. And also there's some opportunity to investigate these new tactile diagram ideas, and also to investigate how students apply new concepts in common web design tasks. There's lots more as part of the discussion in the paper, so please read the paper and let us know if you have any questions or follow-up comments. I'll leave you guys with a quote. This is from exit interview participant number 2, and they said, "This class was empowering. It changed my relationship to my computer and gave me confidence in a subject that I have more often felt left out of." Thank you very much. That's everything. And again, my name is Claire Kearney-Volpe, and you can email me at claire.kv@nyu.edu. And you can email Chancey Fleet at Chancey, CHANCEY, Fleet, FLEET @nypl.org. Get in touch with either of us. We can put you in touch with our co-authors. Thank you very much.